The humid air of Lagos was a far cry from the rolling hills of West Virginia. But for Sabena Chapman, it smelled like a fresh start. At 28, she had spent her life tucked between the shadows of her sisters, the perfect eldest, and the fearless baby. Sabena had always been the bridge. The middle child with the masters in English who felt her own life was a series of stereotypical, uneventful chapters. She had found her escape in the melodic cadence of foreign tongues and the vibrant, dramatic world of Nollywood films. Now she wasn't just watching the screen, she was living in the frame. The meeting of two worlds. The kitchen in West Virginia had felt smaller than usual that morning. The air was thick with the scent of her mother's disappointment, a fragrance Sabena had grown used to. "Lorena is being inducted into the Bar Association's Circle of Excellence," her mother had said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle in the tablecloth. Then came the sigh, the one that always preceded the lecture. "You're so smart, Benna. You could have been anything. But you chose to teach in a school that closes because the pipes freeze. It's noble, yes, but nobility doesn't pay for a retirement in Martha's Vineyard." Sabena didn't mention that she didn't want a retirement in Martha's Vineyard. She didn't mention that seeing a child finally grasp the subjunctive mood in French felt more like success than any partnership track in DC ever could. She simply took a breath, told her mother she was right to end the friction, and walked out. She was done being the reasonable middle child. She was ready to be the fearless one. The leap of faith. 4 weeks later, the West Virginia frost was a memory. The rigorous vetting process had been a whirlwind. The psychological assessments, the deep dive background checks, and that grueling but strangely soulful 2-hour talk with Madame Sola Balogun, the Balogun matriarch. Madame Sola hadn't just looked at Sabena's master's degree, she had looked at her spirit. Now, as the wheels of the plane chirped against the tarmac at Murtala Muhammad International Airport, Sabena felt a jolt of adrenaline. She smoothed her hands over her lap, her long dreadlocks clicking softly against the seat. The arrival at the estate, a black SUV, whisked her through the organized chaos of Lagos, vibrant, loud, and smelling of salt air and exhaust, to the Ikoyi district. The Balogun estate was a fortress of glass, stone, and tropical greenery. Ifeoluwa met her at the door with a warm, measuring smile. "Welcome home, Sabena. The boys are eager, though they don't know it yet." But the warmth ended there. From the top of the sweeping marble staircase, a shadow loomed. Sola Balogun descended like a storm cloud. He was breathtakingly tall, his deep ebony skin glowing under the chandelier, his frame honed by those legendary 4:30 a.m. workouts. But his eyes, intense, piercing, and deep-set, carried a coldness that made the air-conditioned foyer feel like the West Virginia winter she'd left behind. "This is her?" Sola asked, his voice a deep, pulsating baritone. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't even stop moving as he headed toward the door, checking his gold watch. "She looks soft. This isn't a Nollywood set, Mother. It's a household of mourning children." Sabena felt the familiar prickle of being underestimated. In her mother's house, she was the underachiever. In this man's house, she was soft. Determined that she would not carry the sting of being underestimated across an ocean, Sabena squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Mr. Balogun, I am a lot of things, but soft is not one of them," she said, her voice steady and her Yoruba flawless. "I am quite capable of matching energy for energy, aura for aura. It will be entirely up to you which version of me you get." Sola paused, his hand on the heavy walnut door. He turned slowly, his gaze raking over her, from the crown of her dreadlocks to the steady set of her serious brown eyes. No one in his employ, and very few in his boardroom, spoke to him with such casual defiance. "You have a sharp tongue, Miss Chapman," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I have a master's in English," she retorted with a faint, witty tilt of her head. "It would be a waste of my education if I didn't use it properly." Madame Sola Balogun stood back, watching the exchange between her son and Sabena, with a look of quiet amusement. A knowing smile played on her lips, as if she were reading the opening chapters of a story only she knew the ending to. "This is going to be interesting," she murmured to herself. Turning to a young staff member standing at attention, she gave a brief nod. "Take Sabena's bags to her room." She then focused her warmth on Sabena, who still looked a bit dazed. "The boys are still in school and won't be back for another hour. That should give you some time to settle in." "I'm fine, really," Sabena replied, though her voice trailed off. She was still trying to wrap her head around the reality that she was actually standing in the heart of Lagos. A room fit for a queen. Sabena was escorted to her quarters, and as the door opened, she nearly tripped over her own feet. The room alone was larger than her entire studio apartment back home, and the bed, massive and inviting, seemed bigger than her old bathroom. The decor was a vibrant explosion of brilliant blues and emerald greens, regal golds and deep reds. In the bathroom, the counters were lined with artisanal lotions, soaps and creams that likely cost more than her entire monthly salary. On the vanity across the room sat a massive bouquet of tropical flowers and a tiered fruit tray with a simple, elegant note, "Welcome." A gentle intervention, a light knock at the door interrupted her awe. It was Ma Ifeoluwa, as she had been kindly instructed to call her. "Dear, you've had a grueling journey," Ma Ifeoluwa said, her eyes softening. "Freshen up and get some rest. I'll send someone to wake you for dinner." "What about meeting the boys?" Sabena asked, feeling a surge of nervous responsibility. Ma Ifeoluwa smiled dismissively. "They aren't going anywhere. You can meet them when you're feeling more like yourself. Dinner is plenty of time." The weight of the 31-hour flight suddenly crashed down on Sabena. Grateful for the permission to succumb to her exhaustion, she took a quick, steaming shower and slipped into a simple, deep orange sundress. Just 30 minutes, she promised herself, eyeing the clock as she sank into the mattress. But her body had other plans. The bed rose up to meet her like a warm, silk-sheeted hug, and before she could even finish the thought, she was fast asleep. Sabena awoke to what she could only describe as an intoxicating smorgasbord of savory spices. The alluring aromas drifted through her room, lifting her gently from her bed. She freshened up, checked her minimal makeup, and smoothed her hair into a neat ponytail. Hesitating at the door, she tried to determine which way those tantalizing scents were coming from. As she settled on a direction, he appeared, Sola Balogun, standing in the hallway, gazing at her with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. Sabena squared her shoulders and tilted her head defiantly. "Hello, Mr. Balogun," she said, adopting a more authoritative tone. His eyes flicked to her as if he'd just noticed her presence, already deciding she was unwelcome. "Miss Chapman," he responded curtly. "Would you be so kind as to direct me to the kitchen?" she asked. Another pause, another piercing stare. Then he turned without a word. "Follow me," he said, heading down the hall. When Sabena entered the space, actually, it was the dining room. It was nothing short of grand. An elegant table, wrapped in marble, with gold accents and crystal, stretched before her. The table was laden with an assortment of delicacies, as if an entire feast had been prepared just for her. Suddenly, her stomach protested violently, as if it too was eager to partake in the luxurious spread laid out before her. "Ah, I hope you were able to get some rest," Ma Ifeoluwa said gently. "Yes, Ma, I feel much better," Sabena replied with a soft smile. "Good," Ma Ifeoluwa called out. "Boys!" Two very different little boys appeared. Segun, the older at 8, was very serious, with eyes that seemed to be beyond his years. His clothes were neat, everything perfectly in place. Sei, the younger at 6, was fighting the urge to run in all directions, squealing the entire time, not out of fear or distress, but simply because, well, why not? "Introduce yourselves," they were instructed. Segun, polished and focused, stepped forward. "Good evening, Miss Chapman. My name is Segun Ajayi. Go Ostei," Ik said formally, extending his hand for a shake. He bowed slightly and respectfully. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Segun Ajayi," Sabena responded, mimicking his slight bow while shaking his hand. "Mr. Segun Ajayi," Sei chimed in with all the amusement and disbelief a 6-year-old could muster when an adult is being weird. No handshake, no bow, just a big toothless grin. Without waiting for a response, he added, "She's pretty. Isn't she pretty, Uncle?" He said this in one breath, with his usual innocence, and a finality that only a child could possess, as if he'd just declared an absolute fact. "Hi, Mr. Sei Ajayi," Sabena said, leaning in slightly toward him. That made him burst into laughter and dash back to whatever activity he'd decided needed his attention more. Only Ma Ifeoluwa noticed the subtle reaction of her son to Sei's declaration. His jaw tightening, his swallowing hard, and his sudden intense interest in the chair he was standing in front of. Yes, this is going to be very interesting," Ma Ifeoluwa murmured to herself. For the first few weeks, Sabena and Sola had managed to avoid each other. Sola was a ghost in his own home, consumed by his oil and jewelry empire, his grief manifesting as a sharp, jagged edge. He avoided the children because looking at them reminded him of the sister he'd lost, He avoided Sabena because looking at her made him feel something other than anger. Their first encounter happened in the Grand Library. Sabena was sitting in a large leather chair, reading, when Sola walked in. He paused, staring at her with that cold, laser-focused gaze. "Hello," she greeted softly. "Hello, Miss Chapman," he replied, with the annoyance of someone speaking to an unwelcome guest. She hesitated for a moment, opening her mouth to speak again, then closing it. He saw the pensive look cross her face, before she started to speak again. "Aren't you going to Sigun's music recital next week?" she asked. "I will be working," he responded, irritation evident in his tone. Whether directed at her or the question, she couldn't tell. "You will be working," she repeated, a hint of disdain in her voice. "So you can't take a few hours off to support your nephew?" "No," he simply said. "Why? Why can't or why won't you make time for anything they do?" she demanded, standing and moving forward, because it was too late to stop herself now. He stilled, his eyes sharpening. The room fell silent, not the silent associated with peace, but a loud, dangerous silence. "Don't question me about anything, Miss Chapman," he said, his voice deliberate. She met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Balogun," she began, "my top priority is the well-being and development of Sigun and Sei. That includes understanding why their uncle isn't playing an active role in their lives." Her determination replaced hesitation. "They need you to show up for them in everything, not just academically and financially." He took a step closer, his eyes darkening. His voice turned steel-like. "The boys need structure, not a tourist." "My mother insisted you be here," he said matter of fact. "I think you are more a distraction than anything." Sabena didn't flinch. Her light brown eyes remained steady. "I'm not a tourist, Mr. Balogun," she said firmly. "I'm a linguist. And while you're worried about distractions, your nephews are worried about why their uncle acts like they are more a burden than anything," she said, letting her voice ice over, throwing his words back at him. Sola froze. No one spoke to him that way. "You forget your place." "I know exactly where I am," Sabena replied, her voice dropping into a flawless, tonal Yoruba. "E mabinu, sugbonoye kiemo pe awanomoyi nilo ife yin." "Don't be angry, but you should know these children need your love." The silence that followed was heavy. Sola finally looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fire behind those serious brown eyes, and the fearless set of her shoulders. He stepped back, fully aware of her closeness, her scent, her heat. "This conversation is over, Miss Chapman," he growled, "and you will not speak of this again." He paused, fixing his intense gaze on her one last time, then turned and walked out of the room. Sabena's body trembled. She tried to convince herself that her tremor was born of anger, but deep down, she knew her body was far from the truth. He was the reason, nothing else. One afternoon, Sabena was in the garden with the boys, teaching them the English and French names for the birds overhead, blending the dialect with vocabulary games. She was laughing, her full figure moving with a grace that was entirely unself-conscious. Sola watched from the balcony, a glass of scotch in his hand. He had spent 3 years behind a wall of silence. He had ignored the socialites and the daughters of billionaires who tried to fill the void his fiancée had left. They were all shadows. But Sabena was sunlight. She was loud, she was brilliant, and she was currently telling his youngest nephew a story in 3 different languages at once. Over the following months, Sabena became the heartbeat of the house. She navigated the complex dynamics with the grace of a woman who had spent years mediating between sisters. She taught the boys English and French, but more importantly, she taught them how to laugh and enjoy the moments. Sola watched from the periphery. He watched her dance with his mother, Ifeoluwa, who took an immediate liking to the girl from West Virginia. He watched the way her dreadlocks swayed when she bent down to comfort a crying child. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, Sola found Sabena in the garden. The anger that usually fueled him felt suddenly, exhaustion-heavy. "Why Nigeria?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why leave everything for a life that isn't yours?" "I spent 28 years being the middle of someone else's story, Sola," she said, using his first name for the first time. "I came here to find the beginning of my own." He looked at her and nodded, as if he understood completely. Standing silently, he observed her for a moment, a series of fleeting expressions that Sabena couldn't quite decipher. Without another word he turned and disappeared back into the house. Sabena sat quietly, letting Ma Ifeoluwa's words settle deep into her mind. Over the past few weeks, she had genuinely noticed a shift in Sola. He was just more present these days. He never overtly participated or forced his way into her space, but he was there, in a quiet, steady way that whispered, "I am here if you need me." He would hang around the dining room after dinner, lingering just a bit longer. He started joining them when she was helping the boys with their homework, offering a silent, supportive anchor. At the boys' recitals, she would look back and see him standing reliably at the back of the room. Then there were the special treats and little gifts he brought home, for no specific reason, just because. But the most surprising gesture of all was the fresh flowers. The very day after she had casually mentioned that fresh flowers turn a house into a home, a beautiful bouquet had arrived. They had continued to show up every single Tuesday since. Sabena was deeply lost in these thoughts when the heavy silence of the room was broken. "Good day, Ma, Rabbi Olatunji is here," one of the servants announced to Ma Ifeoluwa. Before the woman could even finish the announcement, Sabena caught a brief look of distress crossing Ma Ifeoluwa's face. The older woman recovered her composure quickly, but not before Sabena registered the flash of unease. "Hi Ma, it is so nice to see you," a confident voice rang out. Rabbi brushed right past the servant, stepping into the room with an undeniable presence. She bowed respectfully before Ma Ifeoluwa, but her eyes never wavered from Sabena. Strikingly beautiful, Rabbi was tall and slim, dressed in a sharp-tailored red pantsuit, with her natural hair pulled back into a neat, flawless bun. Rabbi didn't just enter a room, she claimed it. Strikingly beautiful, tall and commanding in her tailored red pantsuit, she carried an air of absolute confidence. But it was the way she bypassed the servant, bowed to Ma Ifeoluwa, and immediately trained her eyes on Sabena that made the air turn cool. It wasn't just a greeting, it was an assessment. Sabena felt the shift acutely. The warmth of her thoughts about Sola evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp curiosity. Who was Rabbi Olatunji to this family? And why did her arrival feel less like a casual visit, and more like a challenge? What Ma Ifeoluwa knew, and what Sabena was about to find out, was that Rabbi had not come for a simple social visit. For months Rabbi had been spinning a web of lies to her inner circle, confidently boasting to her friends that she and Sola were intensely dating, and that he had been dropping heavy hints about an impending marriage. She had arrived today with a calculated plan to fully seduce Sola, and permanently push Sabena out of his life. The confrontation at dinner. The tension only escalated when dinner was served. Rabbi weaponized her charm, using the intimate setting to launch a series of passive-aggressive attacks meant to humiliate Sabena. She made pointed remarks about Sabena's background, her temporary place in the household, and subtly implied that she was an outsider who didn't belong in Sola's high society world. Rabbi watched with an expectant, smug smile, waiting for Sabena to break or shrink back in shame. But Sabena refused to play the victim. With quiet dignity and razor-sharp composure, Sabena stood her ground. Every underhanded comment Rabbi hurled across the table was met with a calm, poised and intelligent response. Sabena's grace under fire completely disarmed the hostility, turning Rabbi's cruel barbs back on herself and making the beautiful woman look incredibly petty. Following the disastrous dinner, while Rabbi was away from the room, Ma Ifeoluwa seized the moment to corner Sola in the study. She confronted her son directly, demanding to know his true feelings for Sabena. Sola shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight as he tried to maintain his defenses. "I don't feel anything out of the ordinary for her," he denied quickly, looking away. "I am just being a supportive host." Ma Ifeoluwa let out a soft, knowing laugh that filled the quiet study. She looked at her son with deep affection, shaking her head. "You can try to lie to yourself, Sola, but you cannot lie to me. The homework sessions, standing at the back of the recitals, the flowers showing up every single Tuesday? Sola, you love Sabena." The truth of his mother's words struck Sola like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily speechless as the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. When they all gathered back in the living room, Rabbi, frustrated that her attempts to humiliate Sabena at dinner had failed, completely lost her composure. She crossed a dangerous line, tossing a blatantly disrespectful and cruel insult directly at Sabena, fully expecting Sola to side with her or stay silent. She entirely miscalculated. The quiet man who had been lingering in the background for weeks vanished. Sola's expression turned utterly icy. Stepping fiercely between Rabbi and Sabena, his voice dropped to a dangerous, commanding calm. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer authority in it cut through the room. Because of how abominably she had treated Sabena, Sola told Rabbi that her behavior was unacceptable. her presence was offensive, and she was to leave his house immediately. Stunned, humiliated, and realizing her carefully crafted fantasy had shattered in a matter of hours, Rabi was escorted out into the night. As the front door clicked shut, Sola turned slowly to look at Sabena, his mother's words echoing loudly in the silence between them. The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving an intense, ringing silence in the wake of Rabi's dramatic exit. Sabena looked at Sola, her mind spinning, confused and painfully aware of the sudden, intense heat settling deep within her. The protectiveness he had just shown was overwhelming, but she fought to find her footing. "You did not have to do that. I can take care of myself," she said, inwardly annoyed at the betraying softness of her own voice. "I know," Sola replied, his eyes locked onto hers. "Then why?" Her words caught sharply in her throat. Before she could finish, Sola took 2 swift steps, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of her. Without a word, he grabbed her by the arm and hurried her down the hall into the privacy of the study, shutting the world out behind them. Once inside the study, the tension between them snapped. They stood breathing heavily, looking at each other, the space entirely consumed by their presence. When Sola finally spoke, his voice was raw, deep and ragged. "You are driving me crazy," he confessed, the words tearing out of him. "I have tried everything to get you out of my mind, but I can't. You are invading my thoughts, my dreams. I see your beautiful face everywhere I look. I smell your perfume and replay every conversation, every single interaction in continuous loops until you are seared in my brain, my heart. I don't know what to do with these feelings." Except, he didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he pulled her tightly against him and kissed her. It was a kiss born of pure desperation, like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for entirely too long, and she was the very air he needed for survival. Sabena lost all resolve. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, arching her body into his, allowing the heat of him to meet her own rising passion. Suddenly, Sola pulled away from the embrace. The abrupt rush of coldness where his warmth had just been caused Sabena to let out a small, breathless protest. Sola paused, his chest heaving, and muttered something low and fervent in Yoruba. "Not here, not like this," he rasped, trying to anchor his control. He leaned down, placing a soft, lingering kiss on her forehead. As he pulled back again, he realized that Sabena hadn't spoken a single word since they had burst into the study. His dark gaze found her eyes, his expression a mix of questioning vulnerability and silent pleading. Sabena understood exactly what he was asking. Because her voice and her words had completely abandoned her, she simply shook her head yes. A visible wave of relief washed over Sola's body. His shoulders relaxed and he took her firmly by the hand, leading her out of the study and guiding her toward his bedroom. They managed to slip up the staircase, making it almost all the way to the top completely unnoticed. But just as freedom was in sight, Ma Ifeoluwa stepped directly into their path. Amusement danced across the matriarch's face, and she raised a single, knowing eyebrow as she turned to look directly at the two of them. "Where are you two going?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock innocence. Sabena's eyes instantly shifted downward, suddenly finding the intricate patterns in the wooden floorboards absolutely fascinating. Sola completely lost his cool. He began to stammer, his usual commanding demeanor melting away. We were just. He tried to start the sentence again, completely trapped. Taking mercy on her son, Ma Ifeoluwa let out a loud, joyous laugh that echoed down the hallway. She gracefully stepped out of their pathway, waving them through. Sola didn't waste a second. He tightened his grip on Sabena's hand and practically pulled her the rest of the way toward his room. As they hurried down the corridor, Ma Ifeoluwa's booming laughter followed them, her voice calling out cheerfully after them, "Marry her and give me more grandbabies." The heavy wooden door of Sola's bedroom clicked shut behind them, instantly cutting off the echoing sound of Ma Ifeoluwa's laughter and the rest of the world. For a second they just stood there in the dim, warm light of the room, the sudden privacy making the air feel thick with anticipation. Sola turned to face her, his chest rising and falling. The playful embarrassment from the hallway vanished, replaced entirely by a fierce, consuming intensity. He didn't wait. He closed the space between them, his hands reaching out to cup her face, then his thumb dropping down to trace her collarbone, as if ensuring she was really there. When his lips met hers this time, the desperation from the study transformed into a deep, worshipful passion. It was a slow, intoxicating kiss that deepened with every breath they shared. Sabena tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer, completely losing herself in the taste and warmth of him. The heat that had been building inside her all evening finally boiled over, anchoring her completely to this moment. To him, Sola pulled back just a fraction, his forehead resting against hers, his breath hot against her skin. "I love you, Sabena," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion so raw it made her heart ache. "I've tried to fight it, tried to convince myself it was too soon or too complicated, but it's the truest thing I've ever known. I love you completely." Tears pricked the corners of Sabena's eyes, but they were born of overwhelming relief and joy. The words that had abandoned her downstairs finally found their way to the surface. "I love you too, Sola," she replied, her voice steady and filled with absolute certainty. "I think I've loved you since you started staying after dinner, since the flowers. I love you." A beautiful, breathless smile broke across Sola's face, a stark contrast to the icy expression he had worn hours earlier with Rabbi. He kissed her again, a tender seal of their confessions, before his hands moved to the zipper of her dress. Every touch that followed was deliberate, a silent conversation of reverence and desire. They moved toward the bed together, shedding the weight of the outside world, the secrets, and the interference of others. When they made love, it wasn't just a release of the tension that had built between them over the weeks. It was a profound, passionate binding of two souls. In the quiet sanctuary of his room, surrounded by the scent of his cologne and the warmth of their shared promises, Sabena knew she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning, a beautiful, bright blue dress with matching shoes was delivered to Sabena. The accompanying note simply read, "Dinner, 7 o'clock, Nengtus S." When she appeared at the bottom of the stairs later that evening, Sola's eyes slowly moved the full length of her body. Feeling herself blush under his intense gaze, she bashfully said, "It is beautiful, and a perfect fit. How did you know my size?" He let his eyes devour her again, his gaze lingering on the curve of her breasts. "I make it a point to know everything about the things I want," he murmured, his voice low and sensual. Her blush was undeniable now. Sabena lowered her eyes, fully aware that the sudden heat his words ignited was on full display across her face. Months flew by after that fateful night, and the quiet, steady love Sola had always shown blossomed into something vibrant and undeniable. He no longer stood in the back of the room. He walked proudly by her side. The proposal was nothing short of a fairy tale. Sola took Sabena to a private, beautifully decorated terrace overlooking the Lagos lagoon. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and purple, Sola dropped to one knee. He opened a velvet box to reveal a breathtaking 5-carat yellow diamond, radiant and glowing, perfectly surrounded by a halo of brilliant smaller white diamonds. As Sabena tearfully said yes, Sola smiled and gestured toward the entrance of the terrace. Walking out from the shadows were her mother and her sisters. Sola had secretly flown them all into Nigeria just to be there for this exact moment. The sheer joy of having her family present to witness her happiness made the engagement unforgettable. The celebrations that followed were legendary, cementing their union as the absolute talk of Lagos. The festivities kicked off with a grand traditional Nigerian wedding that was a masterful explosion of culture, royalty, and color. The venue was transformed with rich, vibrant jewel tones, deep regal purples, burnt oranges, and shimmering golds. Sabena and Sola were a vision in their flawlessly coordinated, heavily embellished traditional SOOK attire. Sabena's family embraced the culture with pure joy, dressed beautifully in the family aso-ebi fabrics. The air was thick with the aroma of party jollof rice, small chops, and traditional delicacies, while a live band kept the massive crowd of Lagos high society dancing until the early hours of the morning. Sabena's mother and sisters danced alongside Maifeoluwa, spraying the newlyweds with crisp banknotes, completely captivated by the warmth and grandeur of the Nigerian culture. The next day, the celebration shifted continents for a traditional American wedding, allowing Sabena's heritage to shine just as brightly. Her mother and sisters were right there by her side once again, beaming with pride and profound happiness for the life Sabena had built. In stark contrast to the brilliant, high-energy colors of Lagos, the American wedding was designed with an atmosphere of timeless, romantic serenity. The palette was filled with soft, delicate colors, blush pinks, muted sages, ivory, and soft lavender. Sabena walked down the aisle in a breathtaking, elegant white gown that caught the light of 1,000 candles, the 5-carat yellow diamond catching everyone's eye on her finger. Sola watched her approach with the exact same reverent, breathless expression he had worn in his study months ago. Surrounded by both of their families, they exchanged vows of forever. With two beautiful cultures perfectly honored, and her family there to bless every step of the journey, Sabena knew their love story was finally complete. Following the breathtaking whirlwind of their two weddings, Sola whisked Sabena away for an unforgettable 30-day honeymoon. They began their escape in Menton, the hidden jewel of the French Riviera, perched beautifully right near the Italian border. Known as the City of Lemons, Menton welcomed the newlyweds with its warm microclimate and a stunning cascade of pastel-colored buildings that seemed to tumble down the hillside right into the brilliant blue waters of the Mediterranean. They spent their first weeks lost in a blissful haze, walking hand in hand through the narrow, shaded alleyways of the old town, breathing in the scent of citrus and sea salt. Sola rented a private villa overlooking the water, where they woke up late every morning to fresh croissants and fruit, looking out at a view that seemed painted just for them. Because Menton sat right on the edge of the border, the transition into the next phase of their honeymoon was seamless. They spent the remainder of their 30 days exploring Italy, crossing over to experience the effortless romance of the Italian Riviera and beyond. In Italy, the pace of their days slowed down to match the sweet philosophy of il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. They dined at seaside trattorias in nearby Ligurian villages, laughing over plates of fresh seafood pasta and sipping local wine as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sola held her close as they drove along the winding coastal roads, the wind in their hair, completely detached from the demands of their regular lives. Away from the grand societal eyes of Lagos and the bustling energy of America, the 30 days belonged strictly to them. Between the sun-drenched beaches of Menton and the timeless romance of Italy, they deeper cemented the promises they had made, completely wrapped up in each other and the beautiful beginning of their forever. The 30 days of pure, uninterrupted bliss eventually came to an end, and Sola and Sabena returned home to Lagos, enveloped in the quiet glow of newlyweds. The grand weddings and European coastlines were behind them, but the rhythm of their new life together was sweeter than either had imagined. Until one Tuesday morning, Sabena woke up with her stomach turning violently. She barely made it to the bathroom before she threw up. Sitting on the cold tile floor, she rubbed her temple, instantly assuming the worst. "It must be malaria," she muttered to herself, knowing how easily the fever could sneak up on you. Sola was immediately frantic, pacing the room and telling her he is calling the doctor to test her for malaria. Ma Ifeoluwa, however, just watched from the sidelines, a knowing smile playing on her lips. By the second day of Sabena's malaria, the signs were undeniable to an expert eye. Not only was Sabena still throwing up every morning, but a sudden, frantic urge had overcome her to completely rearrange and deep clean the living and guest rooms. The final giveaway happened in the dead of night. At 3 a.m., Ma Ifeoluwa slipped downstairs for a glass of water, only to find Sabena standing dead center in the middle of the kitchen, glowing under the refrigerator light, happily eating yogurt and cold party jollof rice straight out of the pot with a massive spoon. The next afternoon, Ma Ifeoluwa announced after Sabena refused to eat, citing her uncooperating stomach. "My dear," the matriarch announced, looking directly at Sabena with absolute triumph, "you do not have malaria. The morning sickness, the sudden need to move the couches, and eating yogurt and jollof rice out of the pot at 3 o'clock in the morning? My dear, you are pregnant." Sabena's jaw dropped, her hand flying to her stomach. Sola froze for a fraction of a second as his mother's words registered. When the truth hit him, his face lit up with a joy so pure it was blinding. He let out a loud, breathless laugh, sweeping Sabena completely off her feet and spinning her around the room, planting ecstatic kisses all over her face while Ma Ifeoluwa clapped and cheered in the background. He was going to be a father. They immediately took a test to confirm. The positive results ushered in a new wave of excitement. 9 months later, the house was filled with a different kind of frantic energy. Sabena's mother and sisters had flown back into Lagos, joining Ma Ifeoluwa to form an impenetrable fortress of support as Sabena went into labor. Sola was a ball of nervous energy, refusing to leave Sabena's side for a single second. He held her hand through every contraction, whispering words of love and encouragement, his raw, deep voice anchoring her just as it had in his study a year before. With one final, exhausting push, the heavy tension in the delivery rooms snapped, replaced instantly by the sharp, healthy cry of a newborn baby. The doctor lifted the beautiful, healthy baby boy, and tears immediately streamed down Sola's face. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against Sabena's, both of them crying tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. When the nurse wrapped the baby and placed him gently into Sabena's arms, the grandmothers pushed into the room, Beaming with pride, Sola looked down at his son, his heart overflowing. In honor of the two worlds that had come together to create him, they gave him two beautiful names. To honor his father's heritage and the prayer answered by his birth, he was given the Nigerian name Ayo Olua, meaning the joy of the Lord. And to honor his mother's roots, he was given the classic American name Elijah. Looking at little Elijah Ayo Olua cradled in Sabena's arms, with Sola's arms wrapped tightly around them both, the Tuesday flowers sitting fresh on the bedside table, Sabena knew that their house had truly, beautifully, become a home. And that brings us to the end of our journey. Thank you for spending your time with me today, my cultured pearls. If this story made you feel something, please give it a thumbs up, and share it with someone who appreciates the beauty of our blended traditions. This channel is new, and your help is greatly needed and appreciated in helping us grow. Thank you for spending time with us. I want to hear from you. What part of today's narrative resonated with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what part of the world you are joining us from. Until next time, keep celebrating the authenticity of love and heritage. Bye for now.